She just told the truth, that her mom was Ronda Rousey. The police laughed, handcuffed her, and refused to call her. But an hour later, that same Rousey walked into the station. Subscribe and subscribe in the comments where you're watching from. The evening air was thick with the scent of damp asphalt and cooling metal, the sun having long sunk beneath the rooftops of the small California town. Streetlights flickered with mechanical rhythm, casting long yellow shadows over the sidewalk. 15-year-old LaKea Rousey walked alone, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her hoodie pulled up against the chill. Her pace was unhurried but purposeful. The echo of her sneakers against the pavement was steady, rhythmic, like the footwork drills she'd just finished at her jiu-jitsu class. Her muscles ached in the familiar, satisfying way that came after a hard session. She felt strong, focused, calm. This had been her routine for years. Late-night sessions when the gym was quiet and the world outside didn't expect anything of her. Her mother, Ronda Rousey, had always encouraged independence but never stopped watching from a distance. On most nights, Ronda picked her up. But tonight, LaKea had insisted on walking the short route home. It wasn't far, just 15 blocks and all of it familiar. As she turned down a side street to cut through the edge of an older residential district, headlights flooded the sidewalk. A police cruiser slowed, then stopped just ahead of her. She paused instinctively, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. The patrol car's door creaked open, and 2 officers stepped out. One was tall and lean, maybe in his late 20s, with a neutral expression and hands resting casually on his utility belt. The other was older, stockier, with close-cropped gray hair and a look that LaKea couldn't quite read, but didn't trust. "You out here alone, miss?" the older officer asked, his tone clipped. "Yes, sir," she replied, standing still. Her voice was even, calm. She remembered what her mother had told her about encounters with law enforcement. Keep your hands visible, your tone respectful, your movements slow. "Got any ID on you?" the younger one asked, stepping a bit closer. "No, I'm just coming back from training. I didn't bring my wallet," she explained. "My gym's just a few blocks that way. I live over on West Halstead." "And what were you doing at the gym this late?" "Jiu-jitsu class. It ended about 30 minutes ago." The officers exchanged a glance. The older one's mouth twitched upward into a smirk. "There's been a break-in not far from here," he said. "You fit the description. Female, dark hoodie, athletic build, carrying a bag. Mind if we take a look inside?" "It's just my training gear," she said, but before she could unzip the bag, the older officer stepped forward and took it from her hand. "Hold still," he said sharply. LaKea didn't resist. She let him unzip the duffel and sift through the contents. Gloves, wraps, a water bottle, a towel, a folded gi. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, his expression didn't soften. "You said you're walking home. Who's your guardian?" "My mom." "Name?" "Ronda Rousey." Silence fell. The younger officer raised his eyebrows, but it was the older one who responded first. He let out a laugh, loud and derisive. "Ronda Rousey," he repeated. "You expect us to believe that? It's the truth." "Sure it is," he said, zipping the bag closed again. "You kids will say anything, but making up a celebrity mom, that's desperate. I'm not making it up. You got anything to prove it? Any photos, texts?" "They took my phone at the gym," she said, realizing too late how flimsy that sounded. "It's in my bag." The older officer waved her explanation away. "Enough," he snapped. "Turn around." "What?" "Hands behind your back." Her breath caught. "I didn't do anything." "This is for your safety and ours," he said, already pulling out handcuffs. You're being detained for questioning in connection with a suspected break-in. You can clear it up down at the station." La'Akea stood frozen. Her heart began to pound. She could feel the heat rising to her face. She thought of her mother's voice, steady and sure, telling her to never panic. But she wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared to be treated like a criminal because she was walking home after class. The cuffs were cold and tight on her wrists. The younger officer looked uneasy but didn't intervene. The older one walked her to the back of the patrol car, opened the door, and guided her inside with unnecessary force. As the door slammed shut behind her, La'Akea stared out the window in disbelief. She tried to regulate her breathing, to center herself the way she had been taught on the mat, but nothing had prepared her for the cold silence of the back seat of a police cruiser, or the sting of humiliation pressing into her skin like the steel cuffs around her wrists. The ride to the station was only 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. The older officer kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, shaking his head and muttering things she couldn't hear. She kept her gaze fixed on the city lights passing by, blinking back the burn in her eyes. Inside the station, the overhead lights were harsh, fluorescent. The booking room smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Her bag was taken from her name written on a clipboard she wasn't allowed to see. No one asked if she wanted to call her parent. No one asked if she was okay. They sat her down on a metal bench against the wall. A female officer patted her down while the others watched. The older one made a comment about wannabe tough girls and how the city was crawling with punks trying to act famous. La'Akea kept her mouth shut. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. But more than anything, she wanted her mother. Not Ronda the fighter. Not Ronda the Olympian or the movie star. She wanted her mother who braided her hair before tournaments, who taught her to throw her first armbar, who told her that strength didn't come from muscle, but from knowing who you are. She thought of that now, sitting on a bench in a room that made her feel small and filthy and wrong. She thought of the trophy on her nightstand, of her mom's laugh, of the breakfast they were supposed to have together tomorrow morning. One of the officers returned and tossed her a juice box like she was 5 years old. Another came in and said they'd found nothing actionable in her bag, but that she was still being held for further questioning. Someone had to verify her story. And since she had no ID and no phone, they were going to need time. She asked again, calmly, if she could make a phone call. The answer was the same: no. She asked if someone could check her last name in a public database, look at her mother's name. The older officer laughed again. "Rousey? Yeah, right. And I'm Tom Brady." Laughter followed from the other end of the room. La'Akea looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were still red from grappling drills. Her wrists ached from the cuffs. She felt like something had cracked open inside her, a place she didn't know existed, a part of her that believed that if you just followed the rules, if you were honest and respectful and calm, the world would treat you fairly. That part was bleeding now. She closed her eyes and counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3, the way she did before every match, the way her mother taught her. But this wasn't a fight she could win with training. Outside, the sky deepened to black. Inside, the station buzzed with quiet routine. Phones ringing, officers chatting, coffee brewing. No one saw her. No one believed her. No one cared. But she knew something they didn't. She knew her mother, and she knew that Ronda Rousey didn't lose fights. Not in the ring. Not in life. And especially not when it came to her daughter. La'Akea didn't know it yet, but her mother was already on her way. Already driving, eyes locked on the road, fury held in check beneath layers of discipline. The moment Ronda saw that tracker stop at the Twin Oaks Police Department, the countdown began. And for the men in that station, for the arrogance they wore like armor, the clock was ticking. The storm was coming. The metal bench was colder than it looked, and the chill seeped through the thin fabric of Laakea's sweatpants as if to remind her that she was no longer in control. The walls around her were painted in a sterile shade of off-white, chipped in places where chairs had scraped or boots had kicked. The humming of fluorescent lights overhead was constant and faintly maddening. She sat upright, legs together, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her wrists still bore the faint red marks from the handcuffs. No one had offered her a blanket or a place to rest more comfortably. She didn't expect kindness. Not anymore. There was a clock on the wall, just above a corkboard filled with faded notices and procedural charts. It was 5 minutes to 9. She had been here for nearly an hour, maybe more. Time moved differently in places like this. It dragged and swirled, twisting perceptions until a few minutes could feel like days. She was sure her mother had noticed by now. Ronda never ignored a text or a delay, especially not from her. A door opened with a mechanical buzz, and the same 2 officers who had brought her in stepped into the small holding area. The younger one kept his eyes on the floor. The older officer, Detective Rawls, she now knew from the embroidered name on his chest, gave her a thin-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Still here," he said with theatrical surprise, as though she had somehow chosen to remain detained. "Guess Ronda Rousey's driver got lost." She said nothing. Her gaze dropped to the scuffed tips of her sneakers. Every instinct told her to speak, to defend herself, to demand a call, a lawyer, a shred of recognition. But her mother had taught her that silence, too, could be a weapon. There was power in patience. There was strength in refusing to feed those who thrived on your fear. "You know," Rawls continued, pacing slowly in front of her, "it's not unusual for kids to lie, especially kids who don't have anyone. Makes them feel less alone, less pathetic." Laakea lifted her head. "I have someone." His smile widened. "Sure you do." He turned to his partner. "Write up the form for youth services. She's not cooperating. No verifiable guardian, no ID, no call log. We'll hold her for the night. Maybe someone from social can figure out what to do with her in the morning." "I'm not a runaway," she said, louder now. "No," Rawls agreed. "You're a trespasser." "I wasn't." Inside a commercial property, after hours, no permission, no alibi. That's trespassing. He leaned against the opposite wall, folding his arms. "You want to play smart, kid, but this isn't a playground. This is a station. And here, your story doesn't mean much without facts to back it up." The younger officer hesitated at the threshold of the room. "Sir, should we maybe—" Rawls cut him off with a glance. "Handle the form." Once the door shut behind them, silence settled over the room like a curtain. Laakea's body was tense, her breathing shallow. She fought the urge to cry, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of disbelief pressing down on her chest. She wasn't naive. She knew the world could be cruel, but she hadn't expected to be swallowed by it so suddenly, so impersonally. She hadn't expected to be rendered invisible in a matter of minutes. She looked across the room at her gym bag, now sitting on a metal table under a flickering light. Inside it was the gift she had bought earlier, a small, custom-made keychain shaped like a pair of boxing gloves, engraved with the words, "To my champ." It had cost her 2 weeks of saved allowance, and she had planned to surprise her mother with it in the morning. Ronda would have smiled, maybe even cried a little. Now, it sat in an evidence bag labeled suspicious item, and she was considered a liar for even mentioning her name. Another hour passed. No one returned. The air grew heavier, and Lakia began to feel the creeping edges of fatigue. She hadn't eaten since late afternoon. Her water bottle had been taken away with the bag, and no one had offered a replacement. Her body, trained to endure, was beginning to falter. She shifted her weight and rested her head against the wall behind her, eyes fluttering closed for seconds at a time, only to snap open at every footstep in the corridor. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Rawls. A new officer entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with a clipboard in hand. His badge read, Officer Matthews. He gave her a glance, not unkind but wary, and sat across from her at the table. "Name?" he asked, as though it hadn't already been taken 3 times. Lakia Rousey. "Spell that?" She did. He jotted it down. "Date of birth?" She answered, her voice steady. "Do you know your social security number?" She nodded. He wrote that, too. "Any medications? Allergies?" "No." He looked up from the clipboard. "You know, the system flagged your last name. Your mom, really Ronda Rousey." "Yes." "You got any proof of that?" "It's in my phone. You took it." He tapped his pen against the paper. "Phones are logged at intake. I'll check." She wanted to believe him. He stood and left. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. No one came back. Her stomach tightened with unease. Whatever small hope had flared in her chest was quickly fading again. Another group of officers walked past the glass window. One of them stopped and peered in. It was Rawls. He nudged his colleague and said something under his breath. They both laughed. Lakia looked away, her cheeks burning. Time blurred again. She stopped checking the clock. Her legs grew stiff. Her mouth was dry. The only thing keeping her upright was the image in her mind. Her mother, pushing open the doors, taking control, making them listen. She didn't know when or how, but she believed it. She had to. At some point, she fell into a light, restless sleep, curled on her side against the cold bench. Her dreams were fractured, echoes of matches and voices, flashes of her mother's face, stern and calm, telling her to breathe. She woke with a start when the door opened again. This time, the room filled with harsh, overhead light and louder voices. A female officer barked instructions. Lakia was told to stand, to hold out her arms. They took another set of photos. Fingerprints again. More paperwork. She asked again for a phone call. "Your phone's locked," the woman snapped, "and there's no emergency contact listed in the system. I should be allowed to call. You'll get your call when your processing's done. But I'm a minor. And you're being processed for trespassing and false identification. Sit." Lakia sat. Her hands trembled. Her heart beat so fast she thought it might leap out of her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how justice worked. She hadn't done anything wrong. Another officer wheeled in a small cart with prepackaged food trays. One was set in front of her. Cold meatloaf, dry mashed potatoes, a roll. She picked at it, but hunger had left her. Everything tasted like metal. By the time midnight neared, her mind had gone numb. The fear had dulled into something heavier, something deeper. Not terror, but disillusionment. A knowledge that the truth wasn't enough, that respect and honesty could be met with suspicion and mockery. That her name, her truth, had been reduced to a punchline. She sat in silence, staring at the floor as the hours crept by. No news, no call, no proof, just the cold and the weight. But something had changed. The men in that station didn't know it yet. Outside, on the street beyond the heavy doors, tires screeched against the pavement. A black SUV came to a sudden stop under the buzzing light of the parking lot. The driver's door opened, and Ronda Rousey stepped out. Her face unreadable, her eyes set with the same intensity that had made crowds roar and opponents tremble. She didn't wear makeup. Her hair was tied back. She wore a hoodie and black pants. But her presence filled the air like the crackle before a storm. She didn't run. She didn't need to. She walked. And the system that had laughed at her daughter's name had no idea that judgment was already on its way. The twin doors of the Twin Oaks Police Department stood under buzzing floodlights, casting a cold glow on the cracked pavement below. As the black SUV's engine cooled in the night air, Ronda Rousey stepped forward without pause. Her breath was calm, her gait steady, but the set of her jaw betrayed the storm brewing inside. She had driven the entire 22 minutes with her fingers curled tight around the steering wheel, her eyes flicking between the road and the location dot on the tracking app she had long ago installed on Laakea's phone. Her daughter hadn't moved in over an hour. The icon blinked defiantly from the center of the police station's digital footprint. That was all she needed to know. Inside the station, the late-night lull had settled in. Phones rang lazily. Officers scrolled through their phones or shuffled paperwork, waiting for shift change. The front desk was manned by a young officer whose nameplate read Burke. He looked up with mild disinterest as Ronda entered. For a moment, he saw only a woman in athletic gear, her sweatshirt slightly damp with sweat from adrenaline-fueled tension, her face hard but unreadable. Then recognition flickered across his features like a slow-moving spark. His posture stiffened. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice faltering as he tried to recover his professional tone. "My name is Ronda Rousey," she said, her voice low and even, though it carried a weight that settled heavily in the air. "You have my daughter." Burke blinked. I'd have to check. Name? Laakea Rousey, 15 years old, taken off the street 2 hours ago while walking home from jiu-jitsu class." He swallowed. "One moment." He turned and walked through the side door toward the back, his movements quicker than before. Ronda didn't sit. She remained by the counter, unmoving, her eyes scanning the station's interior like a fighter sizing up the cage before the bell. She saw bulletin boards, sleepy officers, the reflection of herself in the glass, and she saw complacency, arrogance. She'd known that scent since her earliest matches. When she was the underdog, the girl with the judo background no one respected. But tonight wasn't about her. Tonight, they'd messed with her daughter. In the back hallway, Officer Burke found Detective Rawls finishing up a coffee refill. "Sir, there's a woman at the front desk. Says her name is Ronda Rousey." Rawls snorted into his cup. "Of course she does." "No, sir, I think it's really her." Rawls raised an eyebrow, then rolled his eyes. "Jesus. First the kid, now the mom's a look-alike. You people need better lies." "I think it's actually her." Rawls walked past Burke and toward the lobby. He expected a weary soccer mom, maybe an angry teacher type. What he found was a presence so sharp, so centered, it stopped him mid-step. Ronda didn't need to introduce herself. Her eyes were already locked on his, and Rawls felt the involuntary twitch of nerves shoot down his spine. Not fear, not yet, but something deeper. A primal recognition of someone who'd walked into more fights than he'd ever dared. "I'm Detective Rawls," he said. "I understand you're here about—" "My daughter," Ronda interrupted. "Where is she?" Rawls shifted. "She's being held for questioning. We had a situation involving a suspected break-in, and she matched the description." "She matched the description?" Rhonda repeated. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't have to. She had no ID, no phone, refused to give a legitimate guardian's name, claimed you were her mother. "And that was funny to you?" Rawls straightened, puffing himself up. "Ma'am, we follow procedure. We had no confirmation, and we have to take false statements seriously." "You mean like the one you just made?" Rhonda asked. "Because my daughter never lies. And if you'd looked up her name for even a second, you would have known that." Rawls took a step forward. I don't care what you appreciate," Rhonda cut in. Her voice was still calm. "You had my minor daughter in custody for 2 hours without a call. You mocked her. You denied her rights. Where is she?" The tension in the room had shifted. Officers nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. Burke hovered awkwardly near the door. Rawls, sensing the moment slipping out of his hands, motioned for her to follow. "She's in holding," he muttered. "This way." They walked down the hallway, the sound of Rhonda's footsteps like punctuation in the silence. Rawls opened the door to the holding area, where Laakea sat with her back straight against the wall, eyes closed in exhaustion. The second her eyes opened and she saw her mother. She stood. "Mom," she whispered. Rhonda crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her daughter in her arms. It wasn't the tight hug of someone seeking comfort. It was a shield, a barrier between Laakea and everyone else in the room. And behind the embrace, Rhonda's eyes never left Rawls. "We're leaving," Rhonda said. "That's not possible," Rawls replied. "She hasn't been cleared yet. There's paperwork." "Bring it," she said. "There are procedures." "I'm very familiar with procedures." Rawls started to speak again, but another voice rang out from behind. "Miss Rousey." A man in a suit stepped into the room, holding a briefcase and a badge. It was her attorney, Devin Mullins, and he looked like he'd been preparing for this moment since she'd called him. "We're invoking immediate release under guardian retrieval, Statute 173C. Given the minor's age, absence of formal charges, and the failure to contact a legal guardian within 2 hours of detention, the department is in violation of 3 separate state and municipal protocols." Rawls looked between Rhonda and Mullins. "She had no ID. We couldn't confirm. And yet you detained her, questioned her, and denied access to a phone," Mullins replied, "all of which was recorded." He placed a phone on the desk and tapped the screen. The audio played, Laakea's voice clearly requesting a call, Rawls' voice clearly denying it. The tone in the room changed again, colder now, more dangerous. Ronda stood still, letting the silence weigh on the officers like lead. "This is your last chance," she said. "Bring her bag, bring her phone, and bring every file with her name on it." Rawls hesitated, then left the room. Laakea clutched her mother's arm. "They didn't believe me," she whispered. "I do," Rhonda said, "and that's all that matters." 10 minutes later, they stood at the front of the station. The same officers who had laughed earlier now watched with uncertainty. Mullins handed Rhonda a folder of paperwork. Laakea carried her gym bag again, clutching it tightly to her chest. They walked out together, step for step. No words, no fury, just purpose. But as they crossed the parking lot, Rhonda stopped and turned. "This isn't over," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else, not by a long shot. And back inside, behind the safety of bureaucratic walls, no one had any idea just how true that was. Outside the station, the night air was cooler now, touched by the thin mist rising from the asphalt. Ronda stood still beneath the low hum of the parking lot light, her hand resting protectively on Laakea's back. The girl clutched her gym bag like a lifeline, her face pale but composed. They had just crossed the threshold of the building that had turned her name into a joke and her identity into a suspect line item on a report. But Ronda knew the damage went deeper than paper. It was in the eyes of her daughter, where pride had been dimmed, where trust had taken a wound. Ronda didn't speak. She didn't need to. The sound of her boots against concrete said enough as they turned back toward the entrance. This wasn't the end. It wasn't even a pause. It was an intermission before reckoning. And the moment she stepped back inside the building, carrying her daughter's fear with her, the tone of the entire night changed. At the desk, Officer Burke froze in place as Ronda approached. Laakea remained just outside the door with the attorney, who was already preparing legal notices. Burke opened his mouth, but Ronda's gaze cut through the air like a blade. She moved past him without a word, her focus locked on the hallway ahead. She knew exactly where she was going now. As she passed the same corridor she had walked through only moments ago, a door opened ahead. The younger officer who had been with Rawls stepped out, holding a tablet. His eyes met hers for a breath too long, and in that moment he seemed to shrink under the weight of what he saw. He moved aside quickly, not saying a word. At the end of the corridor stood Rawls, hunched over a desk, barking something into a landline. When he turned and saw her, the blood drained slightly from his face. He dropped the phone mid-sentence and took a single step back, almost involuntarily. "I thought you were done here," he said, trying for control but finding only bravado. "I was," Ronda said evenly. "But then I remembered I don't walk away from fights until they're finished." "This isn't a fight," Rawls scoffed, though his voice betrayed tension. "You made it one," she replied. There was a pause. Tense, still, the kind that made the hairs on the back of a neck rise before thunder struck. Rawls's hand twitched near his belt, not toward a weapon, but as if uncertain whether he should brace or shield. Ronda stepped into the room, her shoulders relaxed, her stance casual. But any fighter could see it, the way her feet were placed, the way her breathing slowed. She wasn't preparing to argue. She was readying herself for something more honest, something pure. An older officer with a clipboard tried to intercept her near the corner, raising a hand as if to stop her. He managed half a syllable before Ronda shifted. It was subtle, nothing aggressive, just a pivot of her weight. But it was enough. He stopped cold, backing off, eyes wide. Rawls made the mistake of stepping forward. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and leave the premises. If you don't comply, I'll—" Ronda didn't let him finish. It was fast. So fast the room didn't catch up until the sound of his body hitting the filing cabinet rang out like the end of a round. Her left hand had intercepted his wrist mid-motion, redirected his arm effortlessly, and pushed his weight into imbalance. A second later, she turned him with controlled precision and placed him firmly, not violently but firmly, against the cold metal. Not a punch. Not a strike. A statement. He gasped, stunned, trying to wriggle free, but she held him with a single arm, eyes locked on his. "You don't touch my daughter. You don't speak her name again. And if I ever hear that another officer under your command laughs in the face of a child in distress, I won't bother with the filing cabinet next time." Rawls didn't speak. He couldn't. His ego struggled to recover breath that his body had lost. Around them, the silence was thick. No one moved. The young officer who had first seen Ronda in the lobby stood at the doorway now, completely still, his mouth slightly open. Ronda stepped back and released Rawls, who stumbled slightly, adjusting his uniform. She didn't wait for him to respond. "You thought her name was a punchline," she said quietly, "but that name is why the cameras are on their way." It was true. Outside, journalists were already gathering. Her PR manager had made 3 calls on the way over, and now every outlet with a local feed was en route. This was no longer a local issue. It was a national one. Rawls straightened and opened his mouth again, this time angling for damage control. "Let's not escalate this." "You did that the moment you dismissed her truth," Ronda replied. "You made this personal, so now it's public." The station's captain entered the room seconds later, his expression unreadable. He was older, white-haired, and wore the fatigue of a man who had seen his share of broken systems. But as he assessed the scene, the scattered papers, the stunned officers, Rawls still catching his breath, he didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Ronda and said, "Let's talk in my office." She nodded once, following him with the same steady presence that had carried her through octagons and Olympic finals. In the captain's office, the air was quieter. The walls were lined with certificates and old photographs. On the desk sat a half-empty cup of coffee and a report labeled "Juvenile Incident. Subject, Rousey." The captain sat behind his desk and looked at her for a long moment. "I saw the footage," he said, "from the intake room, the way they treated her." Ronda remained silent. "It was unacceptable," he continued, "and I'll be reviewing the personnel involved." "Start with Rawls," she said. "Then review your policy. Then review your hiring standards. Then look me in the eye and tell me how many other girls like mine didn't have someone come for them." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I'm not trying to fight with you, Miss Rousey." "You already are," she said. "The minute your department treated a black teenage girl like a criminal for walking home in a hoodie." The captain looked down. Then he nodded. "I'll cooperate fully with your lawyer." "You'll do more than that," she said. "You'll apologize, publicly, and you'll promise that every officer here gets re-educated on the rights of minors, on racial bias, on what it means to serve, not just police. Serve." "Are you threatening litigation?" "No," she replied. "I'm promising it." The captain ran a hand down his face and said nothing more. Outside, the press had begun to set up. The PR manager met Ronda as she stepped back through the lobby, whispered updates in her ear. Ronda didn't acknowledge them. Her focus was on who stood near the exit, watching everything. Their eyes met, and for the first time in hours, allowed herself a small, brave smile. When they stepped out into the night, the flashes started. Reporters called her name. Microphones extended. Ronda didn't stop for them. She held her daughter's hand and walked forward, past the shouting, the lights, the storm of attention. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about setting a precedent. They reached the car, and as Ronda opened the door for her daughter, paused. "They were so sure I was lying," she said. "They're going to be just as sure they were wrong," Ronda answered. She got in beside her, and the door closed with the soft finality of a bell. The engine started, and they pulled away from the station, the crowd already shrinking in the rear view. But inside that building, beneath the thin skin of law and order, something had cracked. And Ronda knew. Cracks let the light in, and she was far from done. The house was still when they returned, cloaked in the quiet that followed aftershock. Ronda turned the key slowly in the lock, as if bracing for something to leap out from the shadows. but there was only stillness and the soft, familiar scent of lavender from the diffuser in the hallway. The same scent Laakea had filled the house with last weekend when she'd tried to give the living room a spa vibe and ended up spilling half the oil on the floor. Now, stepping over the threshold, her daughter said nothing. She moved like someone walking through memory instead of reality, her gym bag gripped tightly in her hands. Ronda let her go ahead and followed silently, locking the door behind them. The click of the deadbolt echoed louder than expected. Neither reached for the light switch. The moon outside cast a silver haze across the wooden floor and bathed the photographs on the wall in pale light. Most were from tournaments. Ronda holding Laakea after her first win in the local judo match. Laakea at age 9 with her arm raised by a referee, mouth open in an amazed smile. There was one picture of the two of them camping in the mountains, bundled in matching flannel. It had always been a home filled with strength and silence and resilience. Laakea didn't go to her room. She dropped her bag by the couch and sat slowly, like her body had forgotten how to bend without permission. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands in her lap. Ronda sat beside her but didn't speak. She waited, as she always had, knowing the words would come when they were ready. For several minutes they sat in the dark, the only sound the occasional car humming down the street outside. Then Laakea took a deep breath. "I didn't cry," she said. Ronda didn't turn her head. "I know. I wanted to," she added. "I felt it, but I didn't." "I'm proud of you," Ronda said. Laakea looked down at her hands. "They laughed when I said your name. One of them said I made it up, like I was pretending." Ronda's jaw tensed, but her voice remained calm. "That's because your truth scares people who don't understand it." It wasn't just disbelief. It was like it offended them that someone like me could even imagine being your daughter. The air thickened between them. Ronda turned to face her fully now, one arm resting on the back of the couch. Her gaze was steady and fierce. "They weren't laughing at you. They were laughing to protect themselves, because acknowledging you meant acknowledging what they don't want to believe is possible. That power doesn't look like them anymore." Laakea didn't answer right away. She pressed her fingers against her temples. "I tried everything. I told them where I lived. I gave them your name. I offered to show them pictures. They didn't care. They didn't want to believe you," Ronda said. "It's easier for them to paint you as a problem than to see you as a person." "Then why did you teach me to speak up, if it doesn't matter?" Ronda reached forward and gently turned her daughter's face toward hers. "Because it matters to you. Because it's who you are. And that's what they'll never take from you, no matter how hard they try." There was a long pause before Laakea's shoulders shook slightly. Ronda pulled her into a hug, and this time, it wasn't about protection or resistance. It was about release. The girl buried her face into her mother's shoulder and exhaled the weight she'd carried since the moment those cuffs clicked around her wrists. Ronda held her tightly, stroking the back of her head. "You're safe now, and I promise you, this won't be buried. Not like everything else." "What do you mean?" Ronda let go and stood, walking to the hallway cabinet. She returned with a manila folder thick with documents. She placed it on the coffee table and flipped it open. "Your case isn't the first. Not in that precinct. Not even this year." Laakea leaned forward, her eyes scanning the printed reports. Names, dates, notations, pages and pages of formal complaints, most of which ended with phrases like "no evidence found" or "lack of sufficient grounds to proceed." "I've been tracking it for months," Ronda said. "I was waiting for the right moment to take it public, to expose the pattern. But this," her voice hardened. "They gave me the perfect case." Lakea looked up. "Me?" "You were the final straw," Ronda said. "You didn't just survive what they did, you proved it." Lakea sat back slowly, digesting the magnitude of what her mother was saying. She hadn't just been a victim of a mistake. She had become a symbol of something deeper, something systemically broken. It was overwhelming and frightening, but not paralyzing. Not anymore. "What do we do now?" "We fight," Ronda said, "but not with fists, with facts, with witnesses, with media, with lawyers who know how to shake the walls of institutions until they crumble." "And me?" "You do what you've always done. You stand tall, you walk into every room with your head high, and when they ask who you are, you tell them." Laakea nodded, her fingers resting on the edge of the folder. The weight in her chest hadn't lifted completely, but it was no longer pressing down. Now it hovered just above her, like armor waiting to be worn. Later that night, Ronda called the team, her attorney, her manager, a retired civil rights investigator she had met years ago. She laid out the plan like a general preparing a campaign. They would hold a press conference in 48 hours. They would release the footage, the transcripts, the background files, and they would demand accountability, not only for Laakea, but for the many names in the folder. Laakea listened from the hallway, watching her mother work with the kind of discipline that had won her world titles. It wasn't the fury she had expected. It was strategy, precision, control. And in that, she saw the lesson she had never fully understood until now. Strength wasn't about striking first. It was about knowing exactly when to strike and never missing. The next morning, sunlight broke across the city in soft gold. The world looked the same, but everything had shifted. The precinct hadn't issued a statement yet, but leaks had already begun. Whispers of misconduct, allegations of systemic bias. The name Laakea Rousey had started to circulate on social media. Ronda's name gave it gravity. Her silence thus far gave it mystery. They watched the news in quiet. A blurry cell phone video had surfaced from outside the station. Ronda's entrance, her unflinching walk through a sea of officers. A commentator called it the calm fury of a mother who knows the law and the cost of silence. Laakea turned to her mother and asked, "Did you know this would happen?" "No," Ronda said, "but I was ready for it." Laakea paused. "I think I am now, too." Ronda smiled. "Then they should be worried." Together they rose. The phone was already buzzing, emails pouring in, requests for interviews, demands for comment. But Ronda didn't answer them yet. She looked at her daughter, the center of the storm, now steadier than ever, and nodded once. The fight had only just begun, but they would go into it together as mother and daughter, champions of a different kind of arena. And this time, the world was watching. The first email arrived at 6:14 a.m. sharp, as the early sun stretched itself over the skyline of Twin Oaks and began warming the narrow streets and sharp glass corners of downtown. The subject line read simply, "Urgent, National Coverage Request, NBC." By 7 o'clock, 4 more followed. CBS, The Washington Post, ESPN, and a call from CNN that went directly to voicemail but was promptly followed by a detailed text. The requests were nearly identical. Confirmation, interview, footage, and a statement. Ronda read them with clear eyes and a still mind as the coffee brewed in her kitchen. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. In the living room, Laakea sat cross-legged on the floor, reviewing a printout of the statement her mother's attorney had prepared. It was carefully worded, specific but firm, devoid of inflammatory language yet impossible to misread. The accusation was direct: the unlawful detainment of a minor, denial of due process, emotional abuse during custody, and racial profiling. The evidence, Ronda knew, was indisputable. It wasn't just about what they had done to her daughter. It was about what they had done to dozens of others. She had the files. She had the names. She had the receipts. All that had been missing was a name they couldn't ignore. Now they had it. By the time Ronda and La Akia arrived at the press conference that afternoon, a crowd had already formed. Not just reporters, but students, parents, activists, neighbors. Some held signs with La Akia's name. Others carried photos of loved ones who had been harassed or arrested by the same precinct. The sidewalk in front of the City Hall building pulsed with energy, anger, solidarity, hope. Police in neon vests stood at the perimeter, watching. No one stepped forward to interfere. The mood wasn't hostile, but it buzzed like static before a storm. The small podium had been set on the City Hall steps, flanked by American flags and the seal of Twin Oaks etched in brass behind it. Ronda stepped up first. She wore a black blazer, dark jeans, and no makeup. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense knot. She didn't speak right away. She scanned the crowd slowly, letting silence draw the tension like an archer with a bowstring. Then she began. "My name is Ronda Rousey," she said, "and I am the mother of La Akia Rousey. No titles, no background, no celebrity, just that. She is 15 years old. She is an honors student. She is a martial artist. And 2 nights ago she was arrested for walking home in a hoodie." A ripple moved through the crowd, a wave of disbelieving murmurs. The press leaned forward. They didn't ask her name. They didn't call her guardian. They didn't allow her to make a phone call. When she told the truth, they mocked her. When she showed courage, they punished her. And when I walked into that station, they laughed until they realized who she really was. She paused. The crowd was dead quiet now. This is not about me. It's not even just about my daughter. This is about what happens when a system sees brown skin and calls it danger, when they see confidence and call it arrogance, when they see the truth and call it a lie. She motioned to the lawyer, who stepped forward and placed a thick binder on the podium. This is not a one-time incident. In this binder are 17 complaints of unlawful detainment, improper conduct, and racial profiling by the same department in the last 3 years, 17. Most of them were dismissed without review, until now. The crowd exhaled, long, heavy, furious. "I'm here to say, we see you, we hear you, and we're not going away." When she stepped back, she did not smile. She didn't pose for cameras. She stood next to her daughter as La Akia took the podium. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded her note, but her voice was steady. Her eyes met the crowd directly. She didn't flinch. "I didn't ask to become a symbol," she said. "I just wanted to go home. I told them who I was. I told them the truth, and they laughed. But now the world knows that the truth isn't what scares them. It's that people might start listening to it." Applause erupted, long and sustained. Behind her, Ronda placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. They descended the steps together, cameras flashing, microphones reaching. But they didn't answer any questions. Not yet. That part would come. The precinct issued a brief statement hours later. "The department is reviewing the incident and cooperating fully with legal counsel. We are committed to upholding the values of equity and justice. It was the kind of statement that said nothing, the kind designed to hold space until the storm passed. But this time, the storm wasn't moving on. It was settling in. The following morning, LaKea's name trended across multiple platforms. #Believer, #Justice for LaKea. Prominent athletes and celebrities reposted her speech. Civil rights organizations reached out. Students from across the district organized walkouts. Ronda's PR team had expected traction, but nothing like this. The city wasn't just listening, it was echoing. At the precinct, the fallout began to take form. Rawls was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Internal Affairs initiated an audit of all minor detentions over the past 5 years. The city council called an emergency meeting. The mayor, previously silent, held a press conference in which he promised a full and independent review of all policies concerning juvenile arrests and racial sensitivity. But Ronda didn't slow down. She and her legal team submitted a formal civil rights complaint to the state attorney general's office. They began holding open forums with other families. Stories poured in. Teens held for loitering because they waited at bus stops too long. Boys stopped for riding bikes after dark. A girl whose backpack was searched for no reason other than being near a park after hours. The same phrases appeared over and over. Matched the description. Uncooperative attitude, refused to comply. At one of these forums, a woman named Angela stood to speak. Her son had been detained 2 years prior for suspected trespassing when he cut through a neighborhood shortcut on the way to school. He had been 13. He still refused to walk alone now. Angela's voice broke as she thanked LaKea for her courage. When she sat down, the room stood and clapped. LaKea looked stunned. She had never imagined herself at the center of anything like this. Back at home that night, LaKea sat in her room, a stack of thank you cards on her desk. Strangers had mailed them, handwritten, from all over the country. She read one from a girl in Atlanta who wrote, "You made me feel like I wasn't alone." Another was from an elderly man in Chicago who said, "I never knew how brave young people could be. You made me want to be better." Ronda knocked softly on the door and entered. "How are you feeling?" she asked. LaKea didn't answer right away. She looked at the card in her hand, then up at her mother. "Stronger," she said. Ronda smiled faintly and sat beside her. "That's good, because the next part is harder." "I know." "They're going to question everything. Your tone, your face, your background. They'll say you're too young to understand what happened." "I do understand." "They'll say you're exaggerating." "I'm not." "And they'll say you're only here because of me." LaKea turned fully now. "I'm here because of what they did. You just made sure people listened." Ronda nodded. "Then let's keep them listening." By the end of the week, a class action lawsuit was filed against the Twin Oaks Police Department on behalf of 6 families. Ronda backed it personally. Her legal team offered pro bono representation to other families who came forward. The city council approved funding for a new civilian oversight committee. Mandatory retraining on youth detainment protocols began for all officers, but Ronda knew this wasn't the end. It was the edge of the beginning. Accountability was only the first part. Change, real, sustainable change, would take years, and resistance would come. She had fought too many battles not to expect it, but for the first time, she wasn't standing in the ring alone. One night, near midnight, LaKea brought out the gift she had planned to give her mother before it all happened. It was still wrapped, buried deep in the side pocket of her gym bag, a small velvet box. Inside was a miniature silver belt like a world champion's title, engraved with the words, "To the one who always fights for me." Ronda opened it slowly, her fingers tracing the tiny letters. She didn't cry, but her voice softened in a way that said everything words couldn't. "I don't fight for you," she said. "I fight with you." Lakea smiled. "Good, because we're just getting started." And outside, under the quiet stars of a city that had tried not to hear, something new had taken root. A voice, a name, a reckoning, and the sound of it was only growing louder. The day of the tournament began with rain. Not the kind that battered rooftops or tore leaves from trees, but a soft, persistent drizzle that washed the streets of Twin Oaks in a thin sheen of silver. The pavement outside the youth arena reflected the dim, overcast sky, and the usual bustle of spectators arriving in waves was subdued beneath umbrellas and hurried steps. Inside, however, the energy pulsed like a slow-building current, rising behind the walls of the warm, dry building where boys and girls paced the mats in warm-ups, their nervous breath visible in tiny puffs, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Laakea sat alone on the edge of a bench in the competitors' room, headphones resting around her neck, not playing anything. Her hands were wrapped, her GI folded neatly across her lap, her mouthguard tucked into the small plastic case she held like a charm. Around her, the room buzzed with low voices and the hum of fluorescent lights. She heard her name once, then again, whispered with recognition. It no longer surprised her. Not since everything had happened. Since the night at the station, since the press conference, since the lawsuits and the protests and the reshuffling of an entire department, she had become more than the quiet, focused girl from jiu-jitsu class. She was a name, a symbol. And with that came a tension that felt heavier than any opponent she'd ever faced. But today wasn't about cameras. It wasn't about courtrooms or politics or the opinion of strangers. Today was about the mat, about the clarity that came when everything else melted away and all that remained was movement, instinct, and truth. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. The door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know it was her mother. Ronda's presence didn't come with noise. It came with stillness, a kind of weight in the air as though the space itself made room when she walked in. "You good?" Ronda asked, crouching beside her. Lakia nodded. "You sure?" She opened her eyes. "Yeah, I'm ready." Ronda studied her daughter's face for a moment, then reached forward to adjust the wrap on her wrist, smoothing the edge. "They're gonna want to beat you more than anyone else out there." "I know." "Not just because you're good. I know. Because your name makes them feel something, and people fight hardest against the things that make them feel small." Lakia exhaled, not with anxiety but with resolve. "Then I guess I'm right where I should be." Ronda smiled, her hand squeezing her daughter's knee briefly. "Go show them." When the announcer called her name, the room hushed, not because of celebrity, not even because of reputation, but because there was something about the way Lakia stood when she rose, the way her shoulders squared and her steps didn't falter. She walked toward the mat with the calm assurance of someone who had already survived worse things than defeat. Her first match was quick. Her opponent was fast, aggressive, but sloppy. Lakia stayed patient, defensive, letting the girl burn through energy before slipping behind for a clean takedown and a control that held until time was called. The referee raised her hand. She nodded once and returned to the sideline without flair. By the third round, the murmurs had returned. Spectators began to crowd the edge of the stands. Coaches whispered to each other, "That's her, the girl from the news, the one who stood next to her mom like she owned the damn world." Lakia didn't hear them. Her world narrowed to the mat, to the grip of the jai, to the pressure and rhythm of each breath. She moved like water, fluid, quiet, always circling. In the semifinal, she faced a girl from out of state, taller and clearly more experienced. The match was a war of inches. For the first 2 minutes, neither gained ground. Ronda stood at the edge of the mat, arms crossed, eyes locked, never speaking. She didn't coach, she didn't shout, she trusted. And that trust was visible in the way Lakia fought, measured, strategic, waiting for the mistake. It came in the 4th minute. A poorly timed throw, an exposed hip, and Lakia swept in, locked a hold, and flipped the momentum in seconds. The crowd erupted. The referee slapped the mat. Match over. Back in the prep room, she sat against the wall, sweat running down her spine, her chest heaving. Ronda handed her a towel and a bottle of water. "One more," she said. Lakia looked up. "I can take her." "I know you can." "But?" Ronda's expression didn't change. "This one will come at you for more than points. She's got something to prove." Lakia grinned. "So do I." They didn't talk again before the final. There was no need. In that silence was the knowledge of everything they had built, not just in the gym, but in the years of being ignored, doubted, underestimated. Every lesson Ronda had ever given her daughter had led here, not to a medal, but to the moment before it. The moment when you stand on the edge of yourself and choose what kind of fighter you're going to be. The final began with a handshake. The girl across from her was fast, aggressive, with an explosive style and a hunger in her eyes. The first minute was chaos. Grips, slaps, off balances, resets. Then came a scramble that knocked them both to the ground, each fighting for leverage. For a moment, Lakia was underneath, but she didn't panic. She pivoted, shifted her hips, and used her opponent's weight to reverse the position. From the sideline, Ronda's expression didn't change, but her eyes burned with quiet pride. Lakia's grip tightened. Her hold deepened. She didn't go for the flashy finish. She didn't need to. She controlled. She dominated. And when the final whistle blew, the referee didn't even hesitate before raising her hand again. She bowed, stepped back, and turned to face the stands. The crowd was on its feet. The applause wasn't deafening, but it was steady, honest, full. And in the front row, Ronda stood with her hands in her pockets, a small smile on her lips. After the ceremony, as the photographers jostled for shots and coaches shook hands, Lakia stepped off the podium and straight into her mother's arms. "You didn't just win," Ronda said quietly. "You showed them who you are." Lakia didn't reply. She didn't need to. Later that night, back home, they sat on the porch beneath a sky finally cleared of clouds. The medal rested on the table between them, gleaming in the moonlight. It wasn't gold. It wasn't even first place. But it was earned. "I think I finally understand what you meant," Lakia said softly. "About what?" "About strength. About how it's not just fighting." Ronda tilted her head, waiting. "It's standing your ground when no one believes you. It's walking back onto the mat when the whole world's watching and still doing things your way." Ronda reached forward and took her daughter's hand. "You're not my shadow, Lakia," she said. "You're my proof." They sat in silence, the quiet hum of the city beyond them, the long road ahead still unwritten. But in that moment, they didn't need to look forward. They had already changed the world just by standing still. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see what happens next, and check out our other stories that matter. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it.